What's up, psychedelic investors? My name's James, and you're watching The Psychedelic Investor, your number one news source for psychedelic stocks. Today, I'm happy to present to you our 6th ever This Week in Psychedelic Stocks. Like always, we will start with some industry-wide news before delving into some company-specific updates. But first, I just wanted to tell you guys that on Monday, I'll be releasing my interview with the CEO of Entheon Biomedical Corp, a guy named Timothy Ko. I'm really excited to show this to you guys because I had a lot of fun doing this interview. We talked about why his company is using DMT to treat addiction, as well as a really cool piece of technology the company has developed, which can check a human's genomic code to see if that person is genetically predisposed to have a bad trip when taking psychedelics. So this interview was very interesting. I had a lot of fun doing it, and I'm sure that you guys will have a lot of fun watching it. So make sure that you set that on your calendar. It will be out on Monday, which I guess will probably be tomorrow for most of you watching this now. So if you enjoy this episode, make sure that you invest in the channel with your like and subscribe. Over time, you'll see your investment grow as we continue to bring you the information that you need to know before investing in the psychedelic medicines field. Enjoy the episode. So our first piece of news for you today is actually a really big one, and that is that there appears like there's going to be a new psychedelic medicines ETF coming very soon, and importantly, this one is going to be traded on the New York Stock Exchange, meaning Americans will be able to buy into it. So this ETF, it's going to be called the Advisor Shares Plant Medicine ETF, and it's going to have the ticker symbol PSIL, or SIL. And again, it will be traded on the New York Stock Exchange. I don't know when this is going to be improved, but it's going to be huge, really, for the entire industry, because this is going to give the 300 million plus Americans the opportunity to invest in this sector without really having to choose like this odd stock or that odd stock, often on the OTC markets, because nowadays when there's like 20, 30 different companies working towards using plant medicines to treat mental health maladies, it can be quite difficult trying to sort through it all and deciding what companies to invest in. So the fact that there's going to be an ETF that is focused specifically on this in the United States is really big news. So before we get into the specifics of this ETF, I just want to touch on the group that will be running it, Advisor Shares. So Advisor Shares, they're not just some random group that's out there trying to make an ETF and make money. They actually are the group that have both the second and the third largest marijuana ETFs in the United States. And those would be Mysos and YOLO. And I love that name, YOLO, by the way. So yeah, this group that already has the second and third largest marijuana ETFs is now going to launch a psychedelic medicines ETF, which is very exciting. So just taking a look at this initial document that they filed, I'll just tell you some of the initial key takeaways that I got from it. So first and foremost, this ETF is going to be actively managed, meaning that they're going to have groups of professionals looking and deciding which companies are better than others and how much money to put into each one. And that contrasts with the other ETF that's currently on the market, the Horizons Psychedelic Medicines ETF, or Psych, PSYK, which is traded on the NEO exchange in Canada. Psych is passively managed, meaning that they just look at how big the market cap is, and if you have a bigger market cap, you're higher in the rankings, and that is it. And so I like actively managed more just because it allows for these professionals to look at more variables than just the market cap when deciding which companies to invest in. For example, I like MindMed more than I like Compass, although of course I like both, but Compass has a higher market cap than MindMed, so in the Horizons ETF they would put Compass above MindMed, but that might not necessarily be the case in this new PSIL ETF. So we're just going to have to wait and see, but that's the first main difference, is this one will be actively managed as opposed to Psych's, which is passively managed. Also important to note in this new ETF is that they're actually going to be also including some marijuana stocks in this ETF, so I like this a little bit less. I guess technically marijuana is considered a psychedelic and it can be used as a medicine, so I guess it does kind of make sense, but nevertheless, I don't really like the fact that this will be included. I guess we're going to have to wait and see how much of the ETF is actually ultimately made up of marijuana stocks. Like, are we going to talk about 10% of it, or are we 50, 70? Like, it's really hard to tell at the moment. And the last really important thing to talk to you about this new ETF is that they say that they're only going to be investing in companies that are on 3 different exchanges: the New York Stock Exchange, the NASDAQ Exchange, and the TSX. So I don't really know how this is going to work, because that's going to exclude almost every single company that is currently in the field. The only real big major company that it would include would be Compass Pathways, which is on the NASDAQ. So maybe, because they did in the document say that for now they were doing this, so maybe they're going to expand this to other exchanges like the NEO, but we're just going to have to wait to see, or maybe they're waiting for these companies to make the jump up to the NASDAQ or up to the New York Stock Exchange or up to the TSX. We don't really know at the point. We're still in the early days. We're just going to have to wait to see what happens. And again, this has massive potential, which is why we're starting off the episode with it. This, if everything goes smoothly, if it runs, if it gets, if there really is an ETF that's on the New York Stock Exchange, it will be really big for the entire industry as a whole. So I'm super excited for this. And once we have more details on it, we're probably going to do another episode on it, but we're just going to have to stay tuned for that. So our next story today comes from the city of Baltimore in the United States. There, the city has decided to decriminalize the possession of all drugs. So I'm just going to go ahead and read you something that the city state attorney, Marilyn Mosby, said. So she said that today, America's war on drug users is over in the city of Baltimore. We are leaving behind the era of tough on crime prosecution and zero tolerance policing and no longer default to the status quo to criminalize mostly people of color for addiction. So I know, Baltimore only has a population of like 600,000 people. It's not affecting that many people, but it's still super important. And the reason it's important is because this is, again, a step in the right direction. So same thing like when Rhode Island is talking about decriminalizing drugs. Yes, 2.5 people and a goat live in Rhode Island, but the fact that all these different jurisdictions are starting to move in the right direction is very positive. We are seeing a trend both in the United States and across the world of ending the war on drugs, which is a necessary first step in the process of psychedelics becoming seen more as medicines than as drugs that people can become addicted to and must be banned. So sticking in the United States for a moment, we're going to head over to Hawaii, whose state senate has actually just passed 2 resolutions calling on state officials to study the therapeutic benefits of psilocybin mushrooms and create a plan that would provide equitable access to the fungi for adult patients. So I'm just going to go ahead and read you 2 of the most important paragraphs from this piece, from this news article, rather. So it says that the current legislation wouldn't legalize the entheogen. Rather, it simply calls for a working group to be established in the health department and for members to study 1, the current laws governing psilocybin at the local level, state and federal levels, 2, the existing research related to the safety and efficacy of using the psychedelic for mental health treatments, and 3, guidelines for medical professionals to prescribe and provide psilocybin to patients. So the next paragraph I'm going to read, the working group is requested to develop a long-term strategic plan to ensure the availability of medicinal psilocybin or psilocin or psilocybin-based and psilocin-based products that are safe, accessible, and affordable for adults 21 years of age or older, the text of the resolution states. So it's important to be straight up with you guys. This isn't legalization. This isn't decriminalization. This isn't even a binding revolution, or a binding resolution, rather. But again, as with Baltimore, it is a step in the right direction. And it's exciting to see more and more jurisdictions deciding to look into the possible benefits of psilocybin and other psychedelic drugs. Of course, we still have a long way to go, but it is exciting developments. And again, these are happening every week, which is really, really great to see. So moving away from the legal side of things and more into the academic side of things, we're going to look at a couple projects that universities are doing. So first up, we have Harvard University, which has decided to start studying psychedelics. And they're doing this through opening something that they call the Center for Neuroscience of Psychedelics, which will be run through their hospital. And it plans to, quote, deploy the hospital's advanced imaging technology and neuroscience know-how to study how the brain changes after psychedelic experiences. And so far, this group has received $3 million in funding, and their first study is going to be, quote, to enroll 20 patients with treatment-resistant depression. After the patients undergo their psilocybin treatment, researchers will scan patients' brains in a functional MRI machine to look for changes in neural networks and repeat the scan months later. So I'm sure, as many of you guys know, Harvard is one of the premier global institutions for research. So the fact that this, especially because, just as a little bit of a side note here, Harvard actually has a history of being very dismissive of psychedelics. We're not really going to get into that right now, but the fact that Harvard now now is starting to kind of take on the reins of this research, kind of taking a leading position, is very exciting to see. And it's not limited to them. And actually, our next story comes from the opposite side of the United States in California, where the University of California, San Francisco has also announced that they're going to study psychedelics. And they're doing this through the formation of a group that they call Neuroscape Psychedelics Division, which has got $6.4 million in funding. And it's important to note that part of that funding, a large part of that funding, actually came from George Goldsmith and Ekaterina Malievskia, who are two of the leaders of Compass Pathways. So it's good to see that Compass Pathways is giving a little bit of money to research universities here. And the most consequential thing that the Neuroscape Psychedelics Division is going to do right away is collaborate with MAPS in their phase 3 trial for MDMA to treat PTSD. So again, it's just very exciting that these world-leading institutions are starting to take psychedelics as medicines really seriously. So some general thoughts here on the general news that I'm providing to you. Again, and it's the same general thoughts I had last week, frankly. It's that every single week we're getting more news on decriminalization, more news on legalization, more news on clinical trials, on universities doing research, on funding projects, etc. And we really do appear to be like we're in the beginnings of a societal change here. We're seeing these updates happen every single week, and it's just exciting to see the pace of change. Of course, we still have like minimum 5 years to wait, so just be prepared. I know I say things are happening quickly, and they are, but there's still a long time to go, but it's exciting. I don't know how else to phrase it with you guys. I'm very happy with how the overarching context of this is going. So now we're going to move into some company-specific news, and as always, we're going to start with my favorite company in the field, Mind Medicine. And MindMed is ticker symbol MMEDF on the OTC market, MMED on the Canadian NEO market, and MMQ on the European Frankfurt Exchange. So we have a lot of news for MindMed this week, and we're not going to go too into depth into some of them because we actually did dedicated episodes to a lot of this news this week. So when that's the case, we'll just put a link above. And without further ado, hopping right in, the first big piece of news that we got this week from MindMed was their financial results for the 2020 year. So the key kind of bullet points of these financial results were that they spent $35 million for the year, and they had $161 million in the bank after Q1 financing deals. So this is very solid. It means that they have enough money in the bank to withstand any market downturn, and they can sustain the company for, like 2 or 3 years, even with increased expenditures. So MindMed is in a very stable financial position, and again, we did a full episode on this, so if you want to go check that out, click on the link above you now. I mean, above me, not above you, but if you look up and see a link, you probably shouldn't click that because you might be hallucinating. But anyhow, I'm getting lost, getting back into the story here. Click on the link above me that you see to go see the financial results video that we made for MindMed. Okay, moving on. So the next big story that we have is MindMed has announced the filing of a preliminary base shelf prospective and a F10 with the SEC. So I know that this is kind of like a word salad and is difficult to understand, but this is going to allow them to do two main things. First, MindMed can raise up to an additional $500 million without having to file a prospectus each time. So basically right now what's happening is each time MindMed wants to raise money, like when they raise $20 million here or $50 million here, they have to file all these forms, do the prospectus each time, whereas now they can just do it whenever they want. If they want to print a little bit more shares and sell some here, do 50 million here, 50 million there, they can do that without having to go through this paperwork each and every time. So I mean, that's good for MindMed. It makes it a little bit easier for them to raise capital. Cool. But then the other important part here is apparently this is a step that is important to take before a company gets uplisted to the NASDAQ. Honestly, I don't really know how much of an effect this is going to have on the NASDAQ uplisting. Aaron from Departure Stocks did a video on it in which he gave the reasons for why this might mean that a NASDAQ uplisting is coming soon. So if you want to go check out those reasons, you can check out that video, but I really don't know, so I don't really have anything else to say on it. I will touch on it in the next story here, which is the fact that MindMed also held their conference call for 2020. So yeah, MindMed held their conference call this week, and the key highlights that they gave was that their clinical trials, they're all running according to plan, they're going according to schedule, they're working on their Albert Digital Medicines division, everything seems to be going hunky-dory. They didn't actually give us that much new details, or almost any new details actually. They just kind of confirmed that things are happening as they should, and when JR was talking about a NASDAQ uplisting, he said that, look, we can't really talk about this right now, there are restrictions on what I can say, but we just filed this F10 form with the SEC, so that's a step in the right direction. And again, zero idea how big of a deal this is. Maybe they'll be uplisted next week, maybe they'll be uplisted next month, or maybe next year, maybe 5 years from now, I don't know. But yeah, apparently this is a step in the right direction, which is cool. Next story of news that we have today is actually breaking as we are doing this episode or filming the episode, so we don't have too much information on it, but hopefully more will come out in the hours and days to come. And that is MindMed has now filed a patent for their 18MC. So this is a really big deal. 18MC, for those of you who are unaware, is their drug that they intend to use to treat opioid addiction and other forms of addiction eventually. It is a derivative of ibogaine that does not cause a hallucination and does not cause negative cardiac effects like ibogaine does, and yet they claim still treats addiction. So they just filed a patent for this, and like I said, brand new information at the time of filming, not many details on it yet, no blog articles written on it yet. But so we're just going to throw up the patent on the screen, we're going to look at it a little bit, and I'll tell you what I think are the most important pieces here. So first, MindMed is attempting to patent the composition of 18MC, and they're going to do this both in an oral dose and as a salt. They're also going to try to patent how it will be used, and they will also try to patent what they're using 18MC to treat, including addictions to cocaine, nicotine, opioids, alcohol, morphine, and methamphetamine. And at the time of filming, I have zero idea if this is likely to be accepted. And we're just going to have to wait and see, get more details on it, hear the opinions of experts. And obviously, if MindMed is able to patent 18MC, this is going to be very good news for investors. It's going to be extraordinarily good news. However, having said that, I have heard chatter before, both on investors groups and a few blog articles, that said that basically MindMed won't be able to patent 18MC because it was created so long ago, decades ago, 1996, and that MindMed, perhaps they could get exclusive rights to using it because they put in the legwork for it, but at most that would be 7 years. But it appears that MindMed at least thinks a little bit differently. That's why they filed this patent. Again, I don't know if it's going to work or not, so we're just going to have to stay tuned for more details. Like I said, it's breaking news at the moment. Next up, we got a story on Cybin, Inc., which is CLXPF on the OTC market and CYBN on the NEO market. So the news that we got coming out of Cybin is that they have completely changed up their management structure, and they say that this is to help with their clinical development. So, like I said, they completely shook up the board, and we're just going to go ahead and read the most important bits from this press release. So, Cybin today announced key senior management changes to lead the build-out of its development and clinical operations in the United States and Europe. Effective immediately, Alexander Belzler, PhD, will serve as Chief Clinical Officer, and Aaron Bartlone will serve as Chief Operating Officer of Cybin US Holdings, Inc. The company also announced that co-founder and former Chief Operating Officer Paul Glavine will assume the role of Chief Growth Officer of Cybin, Inc., and co-founder and former SVP Business Development John Kanakis will assume the role of Chief Business Officer. So, unfortunately, I don't really know enough about these individuals to say with any level of certainty whether this is a good move or not on Cybin's part. In general, I think I would lean towards a total shakeup of the leadership structure being, kind of pointing towards some negative issues, but I don't really know in this case. This news also comes on the heels of several weeks worth of good news for Cybin, from funding announcements to partnership announcements to announcements that they're progressing their clinical trial stages, moving 2 molecules towards clinical trials specifically. So maybe rather than bad news, they just find themselves in a completely new context with all the successes they've had in the past month. And because they're operating in a new context, they decided that they needed a new structure to their leadership organization, their leadership structure. But again, I don't really know. So if you are invested in Cybin, let me know in the comments what you think about this move. Do you think it is a great move? Do you think it's idiotic? Do you really not know what to make of it like I do? It does seem major changing this many important roles, but I don't really know if it's positive or negative. Also, I don't really know what the effect of moving somebody from being the chief operations officer to the chief growth officer would be. Like, what exactly is the difference in roles for these people? Is this something that's changing mostly on paper, or is there really significant groundbreaking changes being made in the boardroom? It's hard to tell at this spot. So again, if you're a Cybin investor and know a little bit more about this, let us know in the comments so we can try to figure out together whether this is a good thing or not. Lastly, we have a couple updates on some smaller companies in the field. We're going to start with Core One Labs, which is CLABF on the OTC and Cool on the CSE. So the first piece of news that we have for Core One Labs is that they have acquired a ketamine clinic down in Texas. And so with this ketamine clinic, it's actually called the Ketamine Infusion Centers of Texas, and it's a health and wellness clinic that provides ketamine infusion therapy to treat depression, bipolar disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, and obsessive compulsive disorder. So we haven't actually covered Core One on this channel before, mostly because it's such a small company. It has a market cap of like just under $60 million, I think, and really, it doesn't have the funding necessary to do all the very expensive clinical trials, hire the dozens of doctors, to test thousands of people, etc. So just based on its limitations in funding, we haven't covered them too much yet. But frankly, this is good news, and if they continue to have good news like this, they'll probably sneak their way into our episodes going forward in the future. The second piece of news that we have on Core One Labs is actually in conjunction with another company, and that company is Lobe Sciences, which is GTSIF on the OTC and Lobe on the CSE. And the news that we have for you today is that both Lobe and Core One are actually being added to the Horizon Stock ETF. So if you're a shareholder in either of those companies, congratulations, this is good news. The fact that these two companies are being added will give them more exposure, and it will also hopefully bring them more capital, raise their stock price a little bit maybe, and make raising capital more affordable in the future. So of course that is very good news. And if these small companies do keep having good news like this, like I just said, we're going to cover them more frequently on the podcast. So just kind of taking a step back and giving my overarching thoughts about everything that happened this week. Again, lots of progress. It's going to take a long time. But I'm happy standing where I am. Like at the moment, I more or less have only invested in this field in mind medicine and compass pathways, but I'm thinking about expanding my portfolio to include some of these other companies now that are really starting to make a dent, really starting to make a splash. And yeah, I'm just getting more and more excited with each passing week, with each time I read a new study, more research I do, I'm becoming more and more excited about this market in general. And yeah, so those are my general thoughts. So again, reminder, tomorrow, Monday, dropping our interview with Timothy Ko, CEO of Entheon Biomedical Corp. It is probably the episode that I'm looking forward to the most of any episode I've done anytime recently. Like I said, it's a great conversation. We really learn a lot both about the psychedelic medicines space in general and also Entheon and DMT and addiction. So I highly suggest going and checking that out. I am very, very, very looking forward to it. That didn't make sense. You can't very look forward to doing something. I am extremely looking forward to doing this episode. Man, I lost my English. I'm going to keep it in. Doesn't matter. I'm just kind of rambling now. So we're going to end the episode. So if you enjoyed it, like and subscribe, support the channel. I love you all, and I will see you tomorrow for the Entheon interview. Peace, guys.